Part 1, Early History and Spanish Colonization. The Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands in the Pacific Ocean, situated on the geologically active Ring of Fire. While this has blessed the islands with rich minerals, it has also exposed them to the constant threat of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Most of the islands are small, with only about 1,000 being inhabited. The archipelago is divided into three main groups: Luzon, North, Visayas, Central, and Mindanao, South. Luzon is the largest and most populated island, home to the capital, Manila. The first human presence in the Philippines dates back as far as 700,000 years with Homo erectus, followed by Homo luzonensis around 134,000 years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived about 47,000 years ago. The ancestors of the current native population, the Austronesians, migrated from Taiwan and mainland Asia around 3000 BC, spreading their culture and language across maritime Southeast Asia. Early Filipino communities, isolated by geography, developed along rivers without a single central government. Instead, they formed strong kinship ties. Trade flourished from as early as 2000 BC through the Maritime Jade Road, a vast network that connected the islands to India and China. Archaeological evidence from this period suggests a time of relative peace lasting about 1,500 years. Written Philippine history began around 900 CE with the Laguna copperplate inscription. By this time, communities had organized into barangays, or city-states, led by chiefs known as datas. These leaders were sometimes called Rajas or sultans depending on their contact with Indian or Islamic cultures. Society was divided into a class system: the noble Majenu, the freeman Maharika, and the enslaved Alipin. Early Filipino culture was a mix of polytheistic animism and ancestor worship, with later influences from the Buddhist Srivijaya Empire and the Hindu-Buddhist Majapahit. Islam arrived in the late 14th century, brought by missionaries and merchants. For centuries, much of the documented history of the Philippines comes from the records of other nations, particularly China. These records detail the powerful pre-colonial states like Tonda and the Sultanate of Sulu, as well as the militaristic Luzons and the gold-rich Rajanate of Butuan. By the 1500s, the Bruneian Sultanate had conquered Tonda and established the vassal state of Sarong, connecting it with the Sultanate of Sulu through marriage. The age of Spanish exploration and conquest. The first European encounter occurred in 1521 when Ferdinand Magellan's Spanish expedition landed on Homanhan Island. He claimed the islands for Spain, naming them the Islas de San Lazaro. He quickly befriended a local leader, Roger Humabon of Cebu, who converted to Catholicism and took the name Carlos. However, the rival chief Lapu-Lapu of Mactan refused to convert or submit. In a show of force, Magellan attacked Lapu-Lapu but was killed in the ensuing battle. This defeat delayed Spanish colonization for decades. In 1564, another expedition led by Miguel López de Legazpi successfully established the first Spanish colony in Cebu. The Spanish slowly expanded their control, conquering Manila and making it the capital of the Spanish East Indies. They spread their influence through force and culture, building forts, presidios, and sending Catholic missionaries who established schools and hospitals. While the Spanish faced internal resistance from local datas and external threats from Portuguese, Chinese, and Dutch forces, they solidified their control. The Philippines was governed under the Viceroyalty of New Spain, Mexico, although it was not a profitable colony for Spain. The Spanish implemented the encomienda system, a form of collective farming where Filipinos were forced to work the land and give a portion of their harvest to the crown. They also restricted trade to only Spanish holdings. In 1762, during the 7 Years' War, a British fleet attacked and captured Manila. Archbishop Manuel Rojo surrendered the city. But another Spanish official, Simón de Andahuay Salazar, established a government in exile and continued to fight. The British occupation was short-lived, as the Treaty of Paris in 1763 returned the Philippines to Spain. The path to independence. The 19th century brought global industrialization. And in 1834, Spain opened the Philippines ports to international trade. This created a new, wealthy Filipino middle class who sent their sons to study in Europe. These students returned with revolutionary ideas of liberty and nationalism, inspired by independence movements in Spanish America. This new sense of a Filipino national identity led to growing opposition against Spanish rule. The propaganda movement sought peaceful reforms, demanding equal rights for Filipinos and representation in the Spanish parliament. When one of its leaders, José Rizal, was exiled, the movement gave way to the more radical Katipunan, a revolutionary group dedicated to achieving full independence. In 1898, the Philippine Revolution began. But it was interrupted by the Spanish-American War. The United States, looking to expand its influence, defeated the Spanish fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay, effectively ending Spain's colonial rule. Filipino revolutionaries under Emilio Aguinaldo established the First Philippine Republic. But the US refused to recognize it. This led to the Philippine-American War in 1899. The Filipinos, outmatched in traditional warfare, adopted guerrilla tactics. The US responded with brutal counterinsurgency methods, including civilian concentration camps and torture. The war officially ended after Aguinaldo's capture in 1901. But resistance continued until 1913. The war was costly, with over 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths from disease and famine. The Philippines then became a US territory under the Insular government, which was meant to guide it toward independence. The Jones Law of 1916 officially stated that independence was the American goal. And the Philippine Independence Act of 1934 set a date for it, July 4, 1946. Part 2, World War II and the modern republic. The Philippines became a commonwealth in 1935, with a government preparing for full independence. However, these plans were disrupted by World War II. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor and simultaneously launched an invasion of the Philippines. American and Filipino forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, were quickly overwhelmed. After a fierce defense, they were forced to surrender at Corregidor, leading to the infamous Bataan Death March, where thousands of prisoners died from starvation and abuse. The Japanese occupation was brutal, with widespread forced labor and human rights abuses. This sparked a fierce and effective underground resistance movement, with nearly 300,000 Filipinos joining guerrilla forces. In October 1944, General MacArthur fulfilled his promise to return, leading a massive Allied force in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. The Allies recaptured Manila in a month-long street-by-street battle. But tens of thousands of civilians were killed. The Japanese surrendered in September 1945. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines was granted full independence and became the Republic of the Philippines. The first president, Manuel Roxas, began the challenging task of rebuilding the nation. He secured vital loans from the US, which in turn tied the two countries together economically and militarily through long-term leases on US bases. The following decades saw a series of presidents who worked to implement social and economic reforms. Ramon Magsaysay's single term, 1953 to 1957, is often called the Golden Years for his honest governance and his commitment to fighting communism at home and abroad through the Manila Pact. He was tragically killed in a plane crash. In 1961, President Diosdado Macapagal changed the Independence Day celebration from July 4 to June 12 to honor the end of Spanish rule rather than US occupation. The Marcos dictatorship and a return to democracy in 1965, Ferdinand Marcos was elected president. Despite initial promises of reform, his rule descended into a brutal dictatorship. Citing civil unrest and a rumored coup, he declared martial law in 1972, which lasted until 1981. During this time, he systematically crushed political opposition, censored the press, and amassed immense personal wealth. Human rights violations were rampant, with thousands of documented cases of torture and extrajudicial killings. In 1986, facing mounting international pressure and a struggling economy, Marcos called a snap election. He ran against Corazon Aquino, the widow of his assassinated political rival. While Aquino clearly won the popular vote, Marcos declared himself the victor, leading to weeks of civil unrest. The People Power revolution and an attempted coup forced Marcos and his family to flee the country in a US helicopter. Corazon Aquino became president and restored democratic institutions, including a new constitution that limited presidential power and re-established a bicameral Congress. However, her administration struggled with political infighting and a devastating natural disaster, the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo, which caused widespread destruction and slowed economic recovery. Since then, the Philippines has faced continued challenges, including political instability and internal conflicts. The presidencies of Rodrigo Duterte and Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., son of the former dictator, have been marked by controversial policies and socio-economic struggles. In recent years, the Philippines has had to navigate growing international tensions, particularly with China's territorial claims in the South China Sea. Despite these challenges, the Philippines continues to be a key player in Pacific and global politics. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor and simultaneously launched an assault on the Philippines, drawing the nation into World War II. The Philippine Army was integrated into the U.S. forces under General Douglas MacArthur. To protect Manila, it was declared an open city, but the Japanese took it on January 2, 1942. President Manuel L. Quezon and Vice President Sergio Osmina were evacuated to Washington, D.C., where they established a government in exile. The Japanese created a puppet government, the Philippine Executive Commission, to manage the country. The initial Japanese invasion caught the American forces unprepared. Their planes were destroyed on the ground, leaving the military exposed. American and Filipino soldiers were forced to retreat and surrender at Corregidor Island. This led to the infamous Bataan Death March, where 75,000 prisoners were forced to march 65 miles north with little food or water. The Japanese, who viewed surrender as a disgrace, treated the prisoners brutally. And an estimated 600 Americans and 15,000 Filipinos died during the march. American forces later avenged this by rescuing the prisoners and retaking Corregidor in February 1945. The Japanese occupation was particularly harsh, marked by the forced labor of Filipinos and the exploitation of women as comfort women. This brutality fueled a strong underground resistance movement made up of isolated guerrilla cells. By the end of the war, nearly 300,000 Filipinos were actively involved in guerrilla warfare, providing crucial intelligence to the Americans. In October 1944, General MacArthur fulfilled his promise to return to the Philippines. The liberation of the islands was a massive undertaking, highlighted by the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. The main Allied fleet, commanded by Admiral William Halsey, engaged Japanese forces, while a second Japanese fleet, under Admiral Kurita Tokeo, nearly broke through to attack the main invasion force. Kurita's fleet was ultimately repelled after fierce fighting, largely due to the fierce resistance of smaller American ships. A third Japanese group was destroyed in the Surigao Strait, marking the last battleship-on-battleship engagement in history and avenging the Pearl Harbor attack. The fight to retake Manila was a brutal street-by-street battle that lasted from February 3 to March 3, 1945. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed as they were trapped in the city by the Japanese. Fighting continued on other islands until Japan officially surrendered on September 2, 1945. The new republic on July 4, 1946, the Philippines was granted full independence, becoming the Republic of the Philippines. The first few decades were dedicated to rebuilding and establishing the nation on the world stage. Before independence, the first presidential election was held in April 1946. Manuel Roxas, a populist supported by General MacArthur, won and focused on rebuilding the country from centuries of foreign rule. To secure vital U.S. loans, he signed 99-year lease agreements for major military bases. Roxas's presidency was cut short when he died in 1948. And his vice president, Elpidio Quirino, took over, implementing social reforms like health insurance and pensions. The 1953 election saw the rise of Ramon Magsaysay, whose administration is often called the Golden Years for its honesty and anti-corruption efforts. Magsaysay positioned the Philippines as a key international partner in the fight against communism, founding the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO. After his death in a plane crash, his successors continued his work. In 1961, President Diosdado Macapagal changed the Independence Day celebration from July 4 to June 12 to commemorate the end of Spanish rule in 1898. The Marcos era and modern times. In 1965, Ferdinand Marcos was elected president, beginning a 21-year period that started with promises of reform but ended in a brutal dictatorship. Marcos declared martial law in 1972, suspending civil liberties and arresting political opponents. He rewrote the constitution to stay in power, and his administration was plagued by nepotism and corruption. The economy suffered, leading to widespread hunger. While human rights violations, including torture and extrajudicial executions, became common. In 1986, facing pressure from the international community, Marcos called a snap election. He was challenged by Corazon Aquino, the widow of his assassinated political rival. Although Aquino won the vote, Marcos declared himself the winner, leading to a civilian uprising known as the People Power Revolution and an attempted coup. Marcos and his family were forced to flee to Hawaii, and Corazon Aquino was sworn in as president. Aquino's administration restored democratic governance with a new constitution that limited presidential power. However, her presidency was plagued by political infighting and a massive natural disaster, the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo, which caused extensive damage and economic setbacks. Later presidents, like Fidel Ramos, worked to achieve peace with armed opposition groups. However, more recent leaders, such as Rodrigo Duterte and Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., have faced controversy and scrutiny. Duterte's presidency was marked by his brutal anti-drug campaign and attempts to pivot away from the US toward China and Russia. Marcos Jr.'s administration has focused on pandemic recovery and is navigating ongoing tensions with China over territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Despite its challenges, the Philippines remains a vital player in Pacific and global politics.